we have been saving up quite okay. We are not very investment savvy. So what we did was we actually invested on some blue chips, which is pretty safe. And the rest of the money, we actually bought our condominium in Singapore. When we actually decided to move to Australia, we had a condo which is fully paid off. And we do have some savings and some blue chips where we can actually encash. To be honest, when we were moving here, we are already in the state where we could actually comfortably retire.
Hey coconuts, welcome back to another episode with me, Rakaesh, and here with Chills with TFC. I've recently relocated to Australia and joined with Andrew and Ronald, who have relocated a while back, and thought this would be a good conversation to understand moving to Australia. As you know, we Singaporeans, we always want to move to Australia, and we want to understand what were the issues they faced and how it has been so far. Andrew, how are you?
Hey, hi. I moved to Australia almost 10 years ago. I moved with my family, 2 kids and my wife. Yeah, I started some small businesses here when I first came, but eventually now I'm semi-retired and I'm actually more looking into investments on property.
Awesome. We'll definitely have to bring that up. Thanks for that, Andrew. Ronald, the farmer, over to you.
I migrated here in January 1996 as a family unit under the independent class. Initial 2 years was a little bit tough, having migrated without a job. So from there, go from strength to strength. I've retired for 2 years already. Because of COVID, we decided to build a new house on 5 acres. That's where we're at the moment. Yep.
Fair enough. Awesome. Okay, so first things first, Andrew, you are in South Australia. Ronald, you are in Western Australia. Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
All right. And you know, coconuts, we're going to talk about location. We're going to talk about visas. We're going to talk about starting afresh and any tips that these folks have. They've done it, they've lived it, and now they're clearly successful. Ronald's retired with a farm with 5 acres. Like, who would have thought it? Ronald, why don't we start with you? How did you come down? I mean, you had a job in Singapore. Did you come down without a job? And then how did you go job hunting? Tell us a bit more about the logistics, budgeting, so on.
Applied for migration under the independent class. In those days, that's based on your qualification and experience. So I'm in a very specialized industry, which is cathodic protection. It's a form of corrosion protection. I think every new migrant, unless you are posted by a company, will face the same problem, which the local always say you don't have local experience. So as you know, Perth always has a boom and bust economy. So in 1996, it was just after the mining bust in 1995. So job was pretty scarce in those days. In order to survive in the early days, I do all kinds of jobs, including 1 year as a croupier in the casino. So it's always about who you know, like they say, So somebody in the UK, which I know from previous job, that a company in Perth was looking for someone with my skill set. So that's how I got back into the industry.
Got you. Wow. I mean, as someone that also moved here without a job, right now job hunting, absolutely, right? Like, I mean, even in Singapore, when we are applying, you cannot just apply out of LinkedIn. You cannot just apply out of, Indeed or all the other things. You need a referral, right? I mean, that's definitely the case, at least for me. And hopefully I can also land a job. So I'm very much listening to this as I interview you guys. This is really something that I want to learn and I want to develop as well with my time here. Andrew, tell us a bit about your story. Why SA?
For my case, we actually migrated with Visa 190, which is skill immigration. I think skill immigration is still there, but probably the class and the subclass might have changed a bit. When I came here, I think same goes to what you guys are facing. I came without a job, without friends here, not even a single friend here. And why Adelaide? Because to be honest, Adelaide initially wasn't in our go-to list. Eventually, I think it was because we can actually get more points by getting state sponsorship. And we were just giving it a thought that, if our aim is to move into Australia, it doesn't matter where in Australia it is, unless you're in the middle of the desert, which is not what you want to be. So for that reason, we thought, why not just give it a go? A lot of friends were telling me that, oh, no, you should move to Perth, you should move to Melbourne, things like that. And we were thinking, if going to SA do give us a higher chance of getting into the country, that's where we will be going. And because of the visa itself, it's state-sponsored to get more points, get additional 10 points if I'm not wrong. We have a moral obligation to the state that we have to be in the state for at least 2 years. So at that point of time, our thoughts is like, yeah, let's go there, try out 2 years. If things don't work out, we can always move to Melbourne. We can always move to Sydney, wherever we want. And that's how we actually landed in SA without friends, without a job. But having said that, I think it's about the mindset because when I first came here, I come from an IT environment, the software development, consulting. I actually start to link up with people in the same industry through LinkedIn. I start to attend some meetups with them, where they actually have regular meetups in the evening for a drink. And that's where I actually built my circle of people who are in the same trade. And eventually, I didn't actually find a job there because that wasn't my objective. My objective is really to build a network. And eventually, I started my own business in IT, a small setup in IT. But I'm actually doing a little bit of setups and mostly on consulting for small businesses.
Oh, business consulting, you mean?
No, I actually consult small businesses in terms of their IT needs, their software needs, and their hardware infrastructure needs. So these are the areas that I'm looking at. But it didn't last very long because eventually when COVID hit in 2020, the business was quite very much hit because my customers who actually own tour agencies, property agencies, all this, there isn't really a lot of things to work on. And that was when I was building my current house. After building the house, because I have a lot of time at that point of time, and I was actually following through the whole process of building. Eventually, I got very interested in building, and I thought, there is still a market in Adelaide for property investment, and that's where I am now.
Okay. Wow. Thank you so much, Andrew. Some tips here as well, right? I mean, you took the route of effectively the state wanting you from Singapore into South Australia. Now, I've known a few friends who want to move to Australia, and I love, tips from both of you. And maybe we'll start with Ronald, where they went through the skill migration, and obviously they don't know which state they're going into. But when they got, say, Northern Territory, or when they got South Australia, they actually rejected it. Now, maybe Ronald, what would you, advise some of the Singaporeans who might be going through this route? Reject it because they want the Melbourne, they want the Sydney, they want maybe, and nowadays everybody wants Brisbane also, right? So Ronald, some tips, and then we'll pass to Andrew.
Yeah, what I would say is that, like what Andrew say, that's the right attitude. It doesn't matter which state needs you, because I believe that every state has their own skill occupation requirement list. So every state is different. So it depends on your experience and qualification, which state needed you. All right. So I think Andrew has the right attitude. You see, the idea is to get your visa first. If the initial 2 years you think that you don't quite enjoy that state or capital that much, you can always move. Anyway, as far as everybody is concerned, for the purpose of migration, apart from Sydney and Melbourne, every other capital city in Australia is still classed as regional for migration purposes, meaning you are going to get more points if you don't choose Sydney and Melbourne. My view for everyone as well is, if you look at the salary table, Canberra has the highest salary, median wage, but maybe that's because there's more politicians in Canberra. Second highest is actually in WA. And as of today, for all the major capital city, Perth is still the lowest in terms of medium housing prices. That's why now the eastern state is catching on. They're buying all the Perth property. Given that you are getting higher wage and lower property price, you'll be way ahead, provided you can get a job eventually. The only issue with Perth is, if you want to come during the boom years, it's much easier to get a job. You see, once the boom ends, the job disappears. So that's my tip to everyone. Yeah.
Thanks, Ronald. Andrew, over to you. What do you think?
I think it's very true that give yourself a chance to experience a country, and going to whichever state that you might have been given or you're given the choice to choose from, I guess it's really up to individual. I mean, for my case, to be honest, partially, I think we just wanted to get into the country. And why there is such a strong urge at that point of time, because I was almost turning 45 anyway. And the migration, a migration application, most of them other than investment migration, the cutoff is at 45.
Right.
Yeah. So although my wife was still 43 back then, but we were thinking, I'm already like almost 45 in a few months. So if I actually get a visa to get into Australia, there's a Chinese saying says 船到桥头自然直, which says when you reach the end of the bridge, it was straightened up. So I think we came with a very open mindset. To be honest, we made a recce trip, being Singaporean. Army always teach us that, right? Go recce first. So we make a short recce trip, just me and my wife, to Adelaide after knowing that probably that's a state that we are going to apply for. Because before that, to be honest, we have traveled to Melbourne, we have traveled to Sydney, even Canberra, but never to Adelaide. So we decided to make a trip. We explore around city, we explore around the hills, and we were thinking, yeah, well, it's not that bad. To be honest, like we have been to Canberra. I think Canberra is something which is, in our opinion, of course, much more less in activities. But of course, Canberra has the advantage of driving an hour into Sydney. We were thinking the same. I mean, it's not that far to fly to Melbourne. It's only slightly less than an hour in the skies. So yeah, that's why I think it's very important. If you are really wanting to do something, like getting into a country, give yourself a chance, give the state a chance as well.
I guess, I mean, one thing you touched on here, Andrew, and Ronald as well, is the priorities, right? What is the priority? Is the priority the state, or for you to move into Australia for whatever the reason? And then from there, go and find something else if that is something that you want, right?
I think the main priority, if you're thinking of migration, is always getting the visa. If you don't qualify for the visa, then everything else is immaterial. So that should be the first priority. Yeah, getting the visa also depends on a lot of factors like your experience, your qualification, your age. So 45 is where under age you get 0 points, so you can never get in after that. Unless you are a spouse sponsorship or something, then that's different.
I think for skill migration now, previously it was a case that if you're over 45, you just get a 0 for the age component. But the current one, at least I think 2 years after I moved here, because I was helping a friend to give him some tips. And at that point of time, it's really they cut off at 45. If you're above 45, there's totally no chance of applying for the visa.
Wow, no economic value, is it?
Probably.
You see, if you are a skilled migrant, they want you for your contribution. So they don't want you to come and then be a burden to the country. So it's like cost benefit, you know. If you don't give them a lot of benefit, then you are only a cost. They don't want you.
Yeah, and you know, actually, I think that's really good. That's really good advice for anyone coming into Australia and really knowing what their long-term plan is. Right, 2 years out of the next 20, out of the next 30. Like, I mean, it's just 2 years. That's what people say about the army, right? Just do the army because it's 2 years out of your 90 years of your life. But Ronald, coming back to you. So, I mean, firstly, you moved at a bust time. You moved in without a job. You took that risk. Can you tell us about why you did that? You mean you knew all of this, and yet you still went? And from what I understand, you were living in the city then as well. Maybe explain a bit more there.
When I was a teenager, always look at the papers in Singapore, and in the classified, you always see quarter-acre block in Australia for 20,000 kind of thing. So I said, that would be nice to own such property. I started my career as a ship engineer. So I've actually traveled to a lot of places in the world, including to Australia, but at that time I hasn't come to Perth yet. So I have a fair idea of how living in each different place of the world is. So Perth is actually a very family-friendly city. In those days, I'm also, like I say, I'm in a very specialized industry. If you leave a company, you practically know which other company there are. So I say, oh, well, why not? You know, if the company is not doing so well, I say, yeah, why not? I always wanted to migrate, so why not now? But I actually consciously delay my application for a year because that time I was doing a part-time degree. Because I know that once I get the degree, I get an extra 10, 15 points. So that actually fast-tracked my application, you know. So I actually did my application myself without any migration agent. It only takes me 4.5 months from submission of application to get a letter from immigration here to say that your application has been approved pending medical. So they actually even waived the interview for me.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a good one. And you said you wanted the plot of acre land and this and that for 20,000. I think you can't even get that in Perth now, by the way, right? So this is way back when.
Yeah, I think it's very surprising. Like what people say with property, hindsight is very good, because when I first came, people's idea is always, when you look at cheap property prices, usually they are in the outer suburbs. People's view is always, nah, I don't want to buy it over there. It's too far and this and that. But in those days when I first came, a lot of places which is now becoming desirable in Perth now, like places like Queen's Rock, Dawesville and all that, you can practically buy like a 700 plus square meter plot, which this is coastal suburb as well. If you know the Perth property market, the first suburb closest to the ocean, or the ocean and the river, is the most expensive. So in those days, they said, this suburb are too far, so nobody wants to buy it. But the property then was like 28,000 per piece of land. I think for the same suburb now, you probably have to pay something like 350, 400,000, or even 500,000 for it.
And how far from the city is this?
Queen's Rock would be, I would say, about 40 kilometers from Perth CBD. So it's about 38 to 40, yeah.
Got it. I mean, 350, 400K can even buy HDBs, yeah. So, I mean...
yeah, but you see, if you have 50,000, 100,000 cash, you just buy 2 plot of land, you can then sell one, it practically fund the construction of your own house with mortgage free, Think about that.
Actually, that brings up the next topic, right? I mean, moving is stressful. You both move with kids, and obviously that was the priority, but we'll touch on that as well. How did you set yourself up financially? You knew you were going to be out of a job. You knew you'll be looking for a job. Andrew, why don't we start with you? Did you have 500,000 in the bank so you can be mortgage free also?
It's a secret. Well, for my case, I think we have been, even long before we decided to move to Australia, we have actually thought about moving away from Singapore. Not because Singapore is not good, of course. Singapore is wonderful. But then when we just got married, I think 2 years down the road after we got married, that was in about the same time as when Ronald actually moved to Australia in the late 1990s. Because my wife actually don't grow up in Singapore. She's from Hong Kong. So when we actually got married and decided to settle down, we have actually asked ourselves this question: is Singapore or Hong Kong where we want to be? So at that point of time, I think we did thought of exploring outside these two countries, just to be fair for her, be fair for me, and then we can explore something new. Eventually, I think we chose Singapore because at that point of time, from my industry, I come from a software engineering and IT background. At that point of time, I think there is still a lot of opportunities in Singapore. It's just growing in that arena. For my wife, I think she's been a civil servant in Hong Kong. She's rather a very generic kind of expertise. She's in HR. And it makes sense for us to settle down in Singapore at that point of time, because if I were to go over to Hong Kong, probably that's not where my expertise will help me to grow my career. So we decided on Singapore. But at that point of time, we did actually have been thinking about moving overseas. Moving overseas, to be honest, the first destination we were thinking is actually Canada.
Colder than Adelaide, that's for sure.
Yeah. But it was a place where my wife, not being a Hong Konger, has quite a number of friends there. And for myself, I have actually also a childhood friend who actually moved there many years back. We visited him for our honeymoon. So it was a place
trip,
sort of. It was like exploring without a definite destination that we want to go. So we did thought about it, but at that point we held it back because I think career at that time we were still in our 20s, and so career is still top priority. So we decided to hold back the idea. But having that at the back of our mind, we have been saving up quite okay. Over I think that was like 15 years before we actually decided to move when I was 16, or around there, 15, 16 years. With that in mind, we have been actually also consciously saving, even at the point when we actually grew up, climb up the corporate ladder, our pay actually grows. We still make it a point that we save a certain portion of our income. We are not very investment savvy. So what we did was we actually invested on some blue chips, which is pretty safe. at that point of time. And the rest of the money savings, we actually bought our condominium in Singapore, which is in property in Singapore, you will never lose money. Most cases. I can't say it for now, but at that point of time, that was okay. So when we actually decided to move to Australia, we had a condo which is fully paid off, and we do have some savings and some blue chips where we can actually encash. So we did actually, to be honest, I won't disclose any amount, but then to be honest, when we were moving here, we are already in the state where we could actually comfortably retire. At that point, when we moved in to Australia, half a year later, we bought a house, and the house was not even 1/3 of the price of the condo that we actually sold.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you had the free cash flow. You had effectively all of that in the bank. Yeah.
So I mean, as much as I wanted to build the network when I first came, it wasn't really like I was desperate looking for a job. The first 2-3 months when you came here, not having to work, it's like, oh, you get retirement, shock, But then after some time, you start to feel bored, seriously. I mean, the kids are going to school, and you start thinking about, I'm only in my mid-40s. Am I going to spend the rest of my, I don't know how many years, of course, but it's been 10, doing nothing and then just looking into the sky and then playing with your fingers. So that's when I actually decided that, maybe I should look out. But in general, I think it's about long-term. Even if you want to do something, like when we first decided that we probably would want to move away from Singapore for in a longer term when we actually grow old and retire. But I think if you have that in mind and you are clear of where you want to go, it makes sense for you to start planning. Planning not in terms of doing application and so on, but at least I think financially you should get yourself better prepared before you move.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, I mean, going to another country and moving to another country, especially with a family, takes years of planning. Right. And clearly that's what you've just spoke about, right? Finance is a big one. I mean, personally for me, I need a job, right? So I'm not at your state or anything. But one thing that, me and my wife talked about was at least 6 months of mortgage in the bank in cash. So at least I've got roughly about 6 months to go and figure out to find a job. That was something that I did. Ronald, what's your advice there? Do you think that's a good way? Do you see it differently to prepare financially to move?
Based on current climate, 6 months worth of expenses is what I would say is the minimum. But for my case, it was a lot different because it was a long time ago. I also have a financially not as responsible ex-wife as well. So when I first migrated, was quite financially challenged because even though we have stayed in the HDB flat for quite a number of years, but because the ex-wife not wanting to move away, live too far from her mother, she encouraged me to buy over the flat from her mother, see. So that creates a problem because it reactivates the minimum occupancy period. So I can't even sell that. So I was like stuck. And I was stuck by the rule change as well because before that, there was no such thing as capital gain tax for HDB in Singapore. But I was caught under the rule where they say, if you sell your HDB within less than 3 year minimum occupancy, there's a capital gain. So I thought, I'll wait. After all, I've already waited 2 years. Why is it another year? It actually goes against me because, as you know, when you sell HDB, the valuation is done by government appointed valuers. So the price actually go down based on their valuation. But because my property was very well renovated, it still fetched a reasonable price. It's just that a potential buyer has to top up with cash, you see, so that creates an issue of its own. So having come over here with a HDB flat stuck, meaning your capital is all tied up, you have no job, so that creates a challenge. Fortunately, in those days, as a PR, because we come in straight as a PR, there's no waiting period for benefits. So at the very least, we still have childcare allowance and all that without having to wait any time, you see. So, but the downside is my ex-wife just kept her portion of it and spent it on herself, which doesn't help in the financial situation. So when I bought a existing property here, I actually had to borrow 40,000 from my father. Fortunately, because at that time he withdrew his CPF, and my mother sort of said, "Yeah, just borrow from him. Otherwise, you'll just spend it all." Which is what he did. He actually spent all his CPF in 1 year.
Wow.
Fortunately, with the money I borrowed, at least it is still this amount. What helped a little bit as well is prior to my migration, because I used to own a condo in Singapore as well. Not fully paid up, not like Andrew, but we hold it for about 3 years or something, and we sold it for some profit. So because I know with my ex-wife is if she see money, she'll want to spend. So I actually fixed at least 50 grand in a fixed deposit here. So at least at a very high rate of interest. I think I was getting like 11+% interest on that fixed deposit. So every bit helps. Yeah, so I would say, yeah, for potential buyer nowadays, because of the waiting period for benefit, you will need at least 6 months worth of expenses to tide you through until you get a job, But like I said, the advice is your first job, doesn't matter what job it is, whether it's relevant to your skill set or not, as long as they are willing to give you a job, just take it. Because you need your run on the board. Not only money in, but you need to overcome that local experience thing, you see. So in the next job, you can say, yeah, I have local experience.
Is that really still the case now? I'm not sure. Mainly because now it's a bit different, right? Now you have IT, now you have software. Effectively, it's transferable. Do you think it's still?
Yeah, even Australian moving interstate encounter this problem.
Yeah, it's something that is very real.
Yeah, in Perth, obviously, if you come in during the boom years where they are really short of people, then they will overlook this, all right? Otherwise, it still applies. So just be aware.
Right. Andrew, you were saying?
Yeah, I mean that part of it really still very real, because I remember, I think that must be like 4 or 5 years back. There was a new migrant that came from Singapore, because at that point of time I was the president of the Singapore Business and Social Association in Adelaide. Some of these new migrants were linked up with me. Yeah, this guy was from IT, so I happened to know a local friend who actually works in a data center. When I actually tried to make a referral to link them up, they met up, but eventually the reason given was that, oh yeah, he have no local experience. So imagine
The
that is
data
still
center. It's the
yeah,
same
yeah.
thing.
Which is what I was trying to tell him. I said, does the computer speak a different language in Australia than outside Australia? But I guess I think it's nice to talk about this local experience thing. I guess after being in Australia and being working in companies, I mean, as a consultant in some companies, even some of the government agencies here, you realize that there is a different way of working that they adopt. I mean, in Singapore, the boss is always expecting you to double up, do this as well. Yeah, you might as well do this as well. Oh, yeah, you have time. Why not you take up this as well? And in Australia, it's a little bit slightly different, because once you actually take up too much, people feel threatened. So that is more like a culture. And this is just one example. Other examples are like on Friday evenings, your colleagues might be asking you, oh, let's go for a drink. It's a normal practice here. I'm not sure about now, because the economy isn't that good, whether they will go drinks every Friday evening. When I first came, I think that was something which is still very common. And then, I mean, if you really can't make it for that night, probably just explain a bit, because when you say no, just no without anything, from then on, they won't invite you. So these are all the small things that come up. And when they say local experience, I think it's more than the knowledge to do the work, but also a little bit more into how they work, how they classify their area of expertise, where they should, where is the border, things like that. So there's a lot more than just doing the job itself.
Wow. Okay. So effectively the culture, right? Yeah. And Ronald, maybe that's also what you're alluding to, right? It's not necessarily just the role, like data center, computer speaks the same language, this and that, but can you fit into the culture? Can you fit into the way we do things?
On top of that, Perth is still predominantly very mining orientated. What you used to work as in Singapore, you may not find a equivalent job here. Most of the time, a lot of migrant actually has to downgrade to a lower entry level position. But it doesn't matter because fortunately in this country, there's still a minimum wage thing. So no matter how low the position is, your income is still generally much higher than in Singapore, at least at the start.
Got it. I mean, before tax lah. Yeah, and I think, thanks so much for that.
Hey, welcome to the Financial Coconut Podcast Network. I'm your host, Reggie, aka your Chief Financial Coconut. And if you're loving what we're creating here, like, share, subscribe, share with your loved ones, comment in the comment section below. And yeah, we'll see you for great content on Chills with TFC.
It's definitely a good tip for me when I hopefully go for interviews and so on and so forth. But I think one thing to note for our listeners, I'm under a spousal visa. So I'm under a bridging visa soon. And actually they gave me Medicare already as I'm waiting for it. So I think that's really good to note that if you are coming under here, at least healthcare is covered as you're still trying to find for a job, so on and so forth. So I think to our listeners out there, at least, your health is there.
Just for our listener, with spousal visa and the bridging visa system, there are very many different classes. You probably have a bridging visa A, so you have all the medical benefit plus there's no employment restriction. But some spousal visa do come with exemption and no work right. So not everybody is the same. I think it's fortunate that we are from Singapore where it is looked on more favorably. If you are migrating as a spouse from what they call a high-risk country, then your rights are different.
Okay, so again, lucky that I'm coming in from Singapore. Yes, so I mean, with my visa, I'm here under a spousal visa because my wife is Australian, and actually they gave me Medicare straight away as I wait for my bridging visa. Because actually, as of now, I'm on a tourist visa, then it moves to a bridging, and then until they want to issue me the dependent partner visa, I think is what it's called. And then 2 years later, I can apply for an independent partner visa. At least that's the route that I'm taking. Quite different to both of you, where you came in via skilled migration and, of course, an independent pass, Ronald.
Yeah. Do you come in under the 801, 810 class or the 100?
I think it's the 800 onshore. I came under the onshore visa. So
that's how I sponsor my current wife. So she's my spousal visa. So I can tell you everything about that if you need to know.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have your contact, so I'll be reaching out for advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the main reason was because offshore visa doesn't give you the bridging, right? Onshore visa does. At least that's what I was reading. So, and it was actually pretty automated, pretty good. It was expensive. It was all right.
Australia visas are changing every year, so numbers are changing, subclasses are changing. So it's always nice to double check on the website itself, or at least talk to a migration agent if you need to. I mean, if it's not a straightforward immigration, it's always nice to find out a little bit more because they are ever changing.
Yeah. I mean, I think they just tightened it again, right? For a number of visas. I think there was a student visa tightening. There are spousal visa tightenings. There's the 482s, which were coming under a work sponsored visa. And that's getting tougher and tougher to get through as well. So, I mean, coconuts, it's important we do our research. I feel that if you have if you're saving up, it's probably good to get some sort of legal advice from anyone that knows it here as well. Or call Ronald. I mean, he seems to know a lot of Andrew, you're not a farmer, but you have done quite a bit in investment in, building houses and so on. Maybe talk us through. Is it because you were bored and you needed to, after your 2 years, like you said, you wanted to go and find your own job, so on and so forth? How did you get into it?
Like I was earlier on also mentioning, it's like during COVID, it just happened that in 2020, that was just when COVID was still pretty rampant. What happens is we actually bought a very old house, which was built in the 1960s. And it was just 2 streets away from my previous house. It happened that we were walking our dog and then we came across this property. And then there was a sign saying that it's for sale, contact the agent. So I was thinking, we have been looking actually, because the previous house was a double-story house, and then it didn't quite fit what we need at that stage of life. But we bought it because back then, that was half a year after I moved to Adelaide. Back then, it was like the kids were so still young, They were 9, they like running up and down the stairs, things like that. So it was like more on the needs. We start to realize that the kids are grown up, they need more space to themselves and so on. So we decided to look for a piece of land to build ourselves because there is always this mystery. I mean, in Singapore, unless you are really rich, how often do you get a chance to build a house that suits what you really need? It can be the case, but it will cost you probably an arm and a leg, and then maybe part of the head as well.
And definitely one kidney, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, maybe. That's provided the kidney is still working well.
Yes.
We never thought of going into a farming, things like that. But we have always had this dream about building a house that is really ours, something that we need and we can enjoy time with the family. So I was saying back to the story, it's like I chanced upon this piece of land, called up the agent. Agent was telling me, "Oh, Mr. To, you're too late. Someone just made an offer." And I say, "Okay, no problem." And then he was asking me as usual what the things that I'm looking out for, so he can sound me out when it happens. I mean, I'm still in contact with the agent. He's helping me a lot now. And eventually, I think few days down the road, he called me and said, "Oh, Mr. To, you are very lucky because this guy who made the offer can't secure his loan." And because when I was discussing with him, I'm telling him that I'm actually buying through cash. And at that point of time, a lot of sellers like the idea of if you're buying it cash because they don't have to risk you not getting a loan, and then they have to re-advertise the property and so on.
What's it called? The finance clause, right? Yeah.
Yes, the subject to finance clause.
Correct. Yes, exactly.
So at that point of time, I think the agent who helped me called me back and told me that, "Oh yeah, Mr. To, you're really lucky, you can actually secure a loan." And it was because there's always a lot of people actually buy properties based on condition or a pre-sale condition that they put up. There is a subject to finance. And if you can't actually secure your finance, unless it's auction, otherwise you can actually retract because auctions are usually, once you actually bid for it, it's yours. For that reason, I actually got this piece of land and I started building. It was very fast. It was also probably about the same period of time Ronald was talking about because I bought it in May. The transaction went through in May 2020. And then immediately, because at that point of time, I was like a little bit like out of job, because IT is not moving. Companies are closed, not open doors. So I actually spent quite intensive time with an architect, with an engineer to draw up this house, which was more or less like my dream house. So we rushed it through, we got approval, and then I really followed through the whole process from getting approval, getting drawings done, things like that, all the way until getting quotes from different builders. Because for my case, I did it as like I get everything defined and then I go to a builder to get them to quote me. So going through that process, it was really something that was interesting because like I was saying, in Singapore, how often do you get the chance to experience all this? So what I did was I went through all the whole process, and even when it was in the process of building, we finally got everything cleared by November. That was almost like 6 months, all the plans, everything done. In the process, I was also getting quotes. And once I log on to the builder itself, because of the fact that I'm just living 2 streets away, I actually come in almost like every day just to see how's the progress. Only whenever there's someone working. Of course, not every day you expect them to be working because of weather and things like that. So I went through the process and we finished the build. And I was saying I bought the land in May 2020. Eventually, the house was completed in July 2021. That's almost like 14 months. Planning plus building everything in. So it was really fast because I've been pushing, and being a project manager half of my life, I was helping the builder to project manage the whole building, telling him, "Hey, you should plan this guy to come in or that guy to come in," things like that. And seriously, I mean, having been working in the IT environment as a project manager, doing project management for building, it was something which was like a different perspective and was very interesting to me at that point of time. That was when I decided that maybe once let's see how we finish the build first. And if it's something that is up to what I was expecting, maybe it's a direction that we can go towards to. Instead of earlier on, I mean, we did thought of doing investment, but really like rental. So I started moving more towards the direction of developing. But I'm not a big scale developer. I don't have that kind of cash. So I'm doing small scale development, like maybe buying a plot of land, subdividing it, and then building 2 houses or 3, or even some places. The recent one I'm looking at is like, it has the capacity to build 5. every project that you take on, there's different kind of challenges, and we have failures as well. For example, last year we bought one piece of land up near the hills, and then after discussion with council, things like that, we realized that it's impossible to subdivide, and it's too costly to build a big villa on it. Eventually, we just sold it off last month, but yeah, we still make a little profit because land prices are continuously going up. No? But these are the things that you hardly get to experience, and it's something that I guess it boils down to the interest. It's just like Ronald going into farming, because it has been his dream to get a 1 acre land or bigger, and really do something about it. And it really goes down to what your interest is. So for my case, I think that's how I actually started moving into this area. But I guess it's up to individual. For people who are new to this, my advice is to be very cautious, because there are a lot of challenges in building, especially when you go with builders. There are builders who go bust over the last 1.5, 2 years now.
Yeah, actually 3 years plus now is they've been just running on cash flow, right? If they don't take up the next project in advance, then they're not going to sustain.
Yeah. So those are the things that you have to look out for. And another thing about property is don't rush into making that investment, because it's not a small investment. So you definitely have to be more cautious and make sure you know the area well and know what's the market demand for that area before you actually jump into it.
Yes, when you're going into development, so on and so forth, there are a lot of things to worry about. And yes, developers have been going through, and you just got to make sure they don't go bust, right? For that sort of thing. Ronald, I mean, you built a home. You've obviously studied all of this. Maybe give us your input on building the homes.
Previously, I have built what they call a project home. What Andrew is saying is called boutique builder, right? So, which is what I'm doing now. So but Andrew engaged the help of an architect. I actually drew my plans myself and give it to the builder. So I actually did it on AutoCAD and all that. Yeah, because having built before, and this is probably the last home that I'll ever build based on my age, because once you retire, you cannot get any more mortgage. That's the other thing you have to consider as well. So I want to get it right. So that's the reason why I opt to actually do half of it as an owner builder. So basically, I asked the builder to just build the up to lockup stage, and then I take over from the builder and complete the house myself. So a lot of the things I actually physically do it myself as well, including concrete screeding, the waterproofing, the tiling. I actually put in all the door frame, hang the doors and everything. So like I said, to be a developer, it applies to all forms of investment. It's all about this 2D word, due diligence. From a developer point of view, it's always easier to know what are the constraints of the development potential before you actually buy the property. So for me, I would much prefer to check the zoning and how much it can subdivide before I actually try to submit an application. Because the other way of doing it is if you try to subdivide beyond the required zoning, then the council will need to go through their consideration and you may get rejected and you have to pay a much higher fee for that. So to minimize your risk, it's better to build within the zoning that is already applied to the land. The difference between a good developer and one starting out is you must also be able to be more open to different construction methods. If you only think about the traditional way of building, like in WA, the preference has always been for double brick. It's different from the other states. But I think when you're faced with material shortages and things like that, you have to think beyond that. Like Andrew said, if you buy a property with a very big slope, a traditional concrete slab would be very costly to build because of the change in topography, right? The contour is just too steep. So the cost actually goes up a lot. So in that kind of case, you must be more open to a different support system. I mean, there's traditional concrete piers, which is still pretty costly. Or there's now more innovative method. There are some foundation method that is actually power-driven, galvanized steel. You must be able to exploit and see whether you can apply a different construction method to bring your cost to a more reasonable level. Otherwise, with every kind of construction, you always tend to have bracket creep, especially in a tight housing construction market where there's material and trade shortages. All right, so there must be flexibility.
Wow. These are the different issues, right? I mean, Andrew talked about a very high level, got a lot of issues here and there, but even just talking about the foundation alone, there's already all of these risks that you would have to take on. And I think, moving on lastly to our last point I want to bring up is we hear so much about the property market in Australia, right? We heard about the Sydney, the Brisbane, the Melbourne, how it's rising, how rent is really high, how housing prices have skyrocketed. Andrew, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's happening in Adelaide now for our listeners to hear in case they want to come in, they want to invest? And Ronald, in your case, Perth.
I still remember when I first moved into Adelaide, even on the suburb like where I am in the slightly eastern part of Adelaide, which somehow I don't know why. Most states, the eastern are usually more expensive. So even on the eastern suburbs, we are looking at price range of even the median price is only in the range of 500K. That was only 10 years back. We're not talking about 30, 40 years. No? But looking at the same suburb, I mean, when I moved into this suburb, the average price was only something like 480,000. But looking at today, median price for this same suburb, which was only less than 10 years, is already 1 million and 1 million, something like a few $100. So that's how much it has grown. You see this drastic growth in Adelaide, especially after COVID. There is a lot of analysts who came up with reasons why this is happening, things like that. From what I'm seeing physically, I mean, even when I look into properties and things like that, it all boils down to the fact that people start to realize that they don't need to be physically in the office. There are a lot of people who are working from home after COVID, even until this very moment. Probably they only go in for meetings every now and then. And you start to see people moving into the suburbs from the city. That's the first thing. And the other thing is, I was also seeing there's a lot of eastern state investors coming into Adelaide. I believe Ronald has mentioned earlier on, this is also happening in Perth. Back in the days when I first came, I was looking for a property. You hardly get houses that go for auction in this suburb. No? But nowadays, even in a suburb, which is a northern suburb, which used to be areas where people try not to reside in because of the demographics, they are also going for auction, and prices are going into skyrocketing. It's like those suburbs are going into 3 to 4 folds over the last maybe 2.5, 3 years. I mean, a property there used to cost maybe in the range of 200,000. Now they are also going into 700,000-800,000. So prices are definitely going up, but that doesn't mean that it's not livable. I mean, sometimes when I was discussing with my wife, we will always talk about this thing about what happens to the next generation. Will they be able to afford a house, a property? But like I was telling, I mean, that's how I always relate it. It's like back in those days during our parents' time, property prices went up. They probably had the same feeling as well. They probably will be thinking, it's like, oh, how are our kids going to afford a property in the future? I guess the future is something that is too far for us to see. We can't be definite that, kids, it's like talking about, sidetrack a bit, talking about AI. People are talking, a lot of people are going to lose their job because of AI and things like that. But you never know because everything is new. In a new environment, and also same goes to the property market, the environment is ever changing. Definitely price won't be coming down. But comparatively, if I compare Adelaide among the eastern, Adelaide is not really eastern, but among the near eastern states, I guess it's still pretty much affordable. And that's why interstate buyers are actually coming to Adelaide for investment. To me, it's like a no-brainer because if you are going to buy a house and rent it out in Sydney, why not you buy a house and rent it out in Adelaide? The initial investment is lower. Rental is not cheap as well here now. So if you work out the sums, actually it does make sense. Of course, I'm not encouraging everyone to come at it. Don't jack up the price.
I thought you want your houses priced up, right? So that's why you're telling everyone to come to Adelaide.
But it's true. It's like people start realizing all this, and then you can see really a lot of, I went to a few auctions where they were represented because the buyer is not here. So they actually got an agent to represent them to do the bids. And these are the ones who are usually the ones that are a little bit hard to fight, because I mean, with the budget they have in Sydney, they can definitely afford something decent in Adelaide. And these are the ones that are actually, in my opinion, jacking up the price as well.
Do you think it's sustainable?
I would say it's under control, but it's still at the level where at this point of time, it's still something which is worth looking at in terms of investing and so on. But we have to see how the market goes, because that's what I foresee as well, because eventually if the lending rates are going to come down next year, there'll be another round of rushing, and then it might bring up the price even further. So I guess property is something which there's no right time or wrong time to do it. I mean, if you are doing it for your own living I guess it's really about your needs rather than the right time. Because there is no right time in property. That's how I look at it.
Got it. Thanks. Thank you so much for that, Andrew. Ronald, what are your thoughts on Perth markets, so on?
What I can say is that there is no one property market in Australia. Different state is different, especially Perth, because it fundamentally boils down to supply and demand. That's why Perth always experience a boom and bust economy. So that affects the property price as well. So usually when Perth do well, eastern state economy slows down and vice versa, because mainly interstate migration, right? So when the commodity boom goes up, we in Perth has the highest wage rate compared to the eastern state apart from Canberra. Right. So when commodity booms fly, a lot of the FIFO job here pays very well. So you imagine if you are somebody, especially in Sydney and Melbourne, where you have to pay sky high mortgage prices and things like that. And then you say, hang on, somebody in WA is offering such a good salary package, like 150, 200,000, even a tradie can earn 200,000. So then it becomes very attractive. And then you try to convince your wife to uproot the family, say, if we sell our property in Sydney and Melbourne, we can buy a house in WA, no mortgage, and yet we can still get a very high salary. So that becomes very attractive. Right? So a lot of people make this move. So if you track property price rise with interstate migration, it matches up, right, for WA. So the problem in Australia is, and WA in particular, is that policy are made to favor mainly the eastern state. So because of this interstate migration thing, when Sydney and Melbourne property price is very high, federal government tends to jack up the interest rate to slow down the growth or introduce policy to reduce the loan amount and things like that. So it hits us when we need it the other way around and vice versa. When COVID hit, actually at the beginning, Perth was already recovering. So we actually don't need all this extra stimulus on the property market. But because of the eastern
But when it was
state,
given,
yeah, when it was given, it just create a lot of trade shortages and material shortages. That's why it leads to a lot of builder going bust, because human greed takes over. They sign on a lot of people, and then all the tradespeople say, wow, poor employment. They start jacking up their rate. So builder not making money. So they go into a cash flow problem. So they call it the profitless boom. So that's the problem. So regarding the property price rises, because of the high price in Sydney and Melbourne, actually Tasmania was the first state that saw great property price growth, because people who can't afford Sydney and Melbourne, because Tasmania is relatively near for them. Yeah, then they say, oh yeah, let's move to Tasmania. We like the climate. We can buy a property for a lot less.
but it's so cold.
So it went up. Yeah, I know. But some people like it. If you are into food and scenery and all that, then Tasmania might be suitable for you. Or if you are already in Melbourne, it's just a little bit more colder. Right? Yeah. So after Tasmania, the next state with property price rise was Brisbane, and that was accelerated by COVID. Because like what Andrew say, with the lockdown and all that, and people working from home, suddenly we will say, oh yeah, we don't have to go to the office. Queensland being a lot nearer, if you are attached to your family, it is a more acceptable move than to move all the way to Perth. It's much harder. So after Brisbane, the next market that the investor targeted was Adelaide. So Adelaide was helped by the federal government project as well, when they basically extended the construction for the defense industry. So that creates a lot of like new migrants chasing jobs and investors seeing the opportunity. So Adelaide went up and Perth was still on holding pattern until the price went up too high. So investors changed their target to Perth. So now it's Perth time to shine. So Perth is currently leading in terms of price rise, but Perth is different. You see, with the rise, there will be a fall. Maybe not a big fall. The fall is always a lot less than the last highest price. Right, so it's like a step rise. But obviously, even within WA, there will be suburb that has a lot higher volatility in terms of the highest price and lowest price between cycle. So it depends on which area you buy, because you have to understand, if you are a FIFO worker, it doesn't matter where you stay. So this kind of people tends to favor living in a more coastal suburb, especially in places like Mandurah, Bunbury, which is near the sea, not too expensive. So you have an over-representation of FIFO people. So when they lose their job, the first thing you probably tell your wife is, because you uproot your family from the eastern state to move over. Most people, especially those on FIFO wages, most people are not wise investors. Whatever they have, they buy big toys, right? Jet ski, boat, things like that. Yeah, a lot of people do that. When the mining crash, you can pick them up for a very good price. All right.
Ronald
So,
has since built a lake and then now got jet skis.
No. As a wise investor, you won't buy this kind of thing, because it's like digging, like they say, owning a boat is like digging a hole in your garden and just shoveling cash in it. So the thing is, when the commodity market turns, the FIFO, high-paid FIFO people lose their job. The first thing they tell their family is, don't worry, I'll find another job. But like I say, WA is different. When it crash, all the jobs disappear. And then the most family can last under that situation is 1 year. After that, they say, I surrender, I have to move back. You see, because at least when they move back to the east, that's where the family support structure, their friends, relative is. So a lot of them will start moving back. That will force the property market to soften, especially from a rental point of view. Just take the example of the last mining boom, not the current price. Last mining boom, for a typical 4x2, the rent went up to about 550 max. But when it corrected, similar house from 550, the rental came down to about 400. And for the lesser house that you can't get for less than 400 in the last boom, you can actually rent it for 200 plus. So there's a big difference. From an investor point of view, if you need that rental income to pay the mortgage, suddenly the investor feel very stressed. So some of them have to sell. If you borrow to the limit, if you understand the market and you have sufficient financial capability, then obviously you can benefit from it.
Got it. And so when is a good time to invest in Perth, do you think? Do you think now is a good time?
No, now is the time to sell. That's why I'm selling. Like they say in investing, you see, be fearful when everyone is greedy, right? And be greedy when everyone is fearful. I have been predicting that the peak is 2025 for the last 6-7 years already. And it looks like it's coming true, right? Because as you know, China economy is softening, and WA depend a lot on China for our export. So I think the time to buy in Perth again, because you want to buy at a good price, is probably around 2028, 2029. So I already have plans for that, to buy something for eventually when we couldn't manage the farm, we want to move back closer to the city. So I already have that in mind.
Yeah, wow. Awesome. Firstly, thanks to you both, Andrew, Ronald, for this. I think it was very insightful. We started off by why you went to Australia, what you were looking for, the financials and the budgeting and how long it took to just plan for that. We then went into, farming. we went into other things that we discussed in terms of visas. And of course, lastly is the investment side of things, which clearly both of you have done and something our listeners are very, very intrigued in, right? I think coconuts, you hear so much about Brisbane, Australia, Brisbane, Melbourne, and Sydney, but not so much in Adelaide and Perth. So I think it was great insights that we got from you, Andrew and Ronald. Thank you so much. And thanks, coconuts. We'll see you at the next episode. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.